everyone, and thank you again for joining us. My name is Madison Gaskill, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health to today's webinar, Addressing Graduate Student Mental Health and Burnout. Before I introduce today's presenter, I do have a few brief announcements to share. And to preface, I have a lot of links that will be in the chat today, but I promise it's all worth exploring. But first things first, as usual, CME and CEU credits are available for today's session. The activity code is 24 PETS. That's 24 PETS. This code will expire in just 24 hours on Thursday, February 26th at 12. So that's tomorrow at noon. So be on the lookout in the chat for information on how you can get those credits. Next, we hope that you will join us on March 10th for our next webinar, Get in the Game, Addressing High-Risk Gambling Among College Students. We'll be joined by Claire Spada with the Problem Gambling Network of Ohio and Cindy Clowner from the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery as they explore current gambling landscapes and its trends, discuss the relationship between high-risk gambling and other behavioral health concerns like alcohol misuse and suicide, and identify strategies to integrate gambling work into existing campus efforts. We're really excited for this collaboration and to bring you information on this really emerging topic in college mental health. So we hope that you can join us. Alrighty, next, through our latest and potentially most ambitious initiative yet, we have a goal of training 1,000 members of Ohio's campus communities in Question, Persuade, Refer, or QPR training. This is a suicide prevention gatekeeper training that prepares trainees to ask the important questions. So we welcome you to join our next QPR Gatekeeper Suicide Prevention training, which will be held virtually on March 19th at noon. And there will be information in the chat on how you can register for that as well. As always, you can find additional information on our upcoming events on our website and social media pages, so stay tuned there by following us. And we've also implemented a webinar topic suggestion box on our webinar page. So that will be linked again, and we encourage you to share any ideas that you have so we can bring topics that are of interest to all of you. Alrighty, and last link, I promise, we encourage you to sign up for our listserv, which is where you can stay up to date on all of the offerings that I just shared, and that will be linked below. Okay, and now, without further ado, I will be introducing our speaker, Tareen Karunagoda. She is one of the knowledge and research leads at the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health. Her work revolves around creating knowledge-sharing products for campus stakeholders to support campus mental well-being. And some of the topics she's worked on include supporting students with chronic health conditions, TBI, and harm reduction on campus, and more. We're very excited to welcome her, and without further ado, I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Madison. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for joining me today. I will start by sharing my screen, and Madison, maybe you can let me know if you're able to see it.
I am able to see it.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so glad that we're not running into tech issues just yet. Hi, everyone. Thank you again. My name is Taryn, and as Madison said, I work for the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, and we are based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So a lot of the work that we do is specifically for the Ontario province in Canada, but a lot of the topics that we discuss is very much applicable for anyone and for most campuses anywhere really. So yeah, and you know what, we'll talk more about what we do a little bit later. But I'll just go over what we will cover in the next 45 minutes. I will go over introduction for, the center or CICMH as we call it, and just kind of like set the stage. We'll talk about the graduate student experience, and we'll specifically talk about addressing burnout within graduate school. So we will go through some key things to look out for, as well as key considerations, as well as some actions that could potentially help graduate students. And then finally, we'll end it off with some recommendations based on some of the work that we have done in the past. We will do questions at the end, just so that I can make sure that I finish up. But I promise I will try my best to make sure that we have time at the end. So, just as an intro, the Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health is, like I said, we work with post-secondary institutions within Ontario, Canada, to sort of help, you know, increase capacity to support student mental health and well-being. But we also do a whole campus approach so that, we know that addressing staff and faculty mental health is also beneficial for students and vice versa. We are a partnership project between different councils and unions, student unions, but we are also a project with Canadian Mental Health Association, which I am an employee of. This is our website where some of the resources that I will mention will be stored in. I will provide a QR code for you to access some of the information directly, but if you would like to learn more, you're welcome to check us out. And then the More Feet on the Ground project that I've highlighted at the second image, that is a project that we created to sort of equip people with skills on supporting other people, and we'll talk more about that later on. And before we talk about anything mental health related, we always like to sort of acknowledge that world events have a big role in how it impacts mental health, really for anyone, but even, specifically for students. It would be very disingenuous to suggest that, students and campuses are the only, factors that impact mental health, and things like COVID-19 pandemic and the experiences that we had with that has shown that, big events can really lead to challenging well-being for people. And whether it's a pandemic, wars, conflicts, and policy changes, these are things that impact everyone. And so with that in mind, I just kind of want to move forward to more specific things to campuses. So let's talk about the reality of mental health on campus, specifically to graduate students. In general, 1 in 5 adults live with a mental health condition, and this is the same in the US as well as in Canada. But when it comes to graduate and professional students, according to the National College Health Assessment Survey for fall 2025, they noted that 1 in 4 graduate students and professional students experience both depression and anxiety as an ongoing chronic condition. 1 in 5 have reported positive for suicide ideation. 35% reported that, stress impacted their academics significantly, and almost half reported they have experienced loneliness. And this report that you can also find online, it goes over how, procrastination also has been one of the major challenges experienced by these students. And knowing, how procrastination works, it's never really about, lack of motivation or laziness. It's usually a symptom of a far deeper problem, usually something like stress, anxiety, or any other, challenges that students may go through. Another thing that they noted was that financial difficulties was a great stressor for them, and that impacted their academics as well. So let's talk about what the biggest stresses are for graduate students. And some of these things you may be well aware of, some of the things might be new. And I want to be mindful that this is not an exhaustive list. I'm pretty sure there might be new things as the world evolves. We'll just go over some of the common ones, like, working on their thesis. That is something that graduate students will be focusing on for most of their graduate career, and that can be a very stressful process. And then managing that with their workload, whether it is to do the research work or the lab work, to do the writing, to work with their lab mates or their supervisor, and also additional work, whether it's they're working as a teaching assistant or they're doing a whole other job on top. Just kind of juggling all those things can be very stressful as well. And that kind of leads to the work-life balance. So managing all of that, but then also making sure that they are, staying connected with their social groups. They are making time for family. A lot of graduate students may be starting their own families around that time. So making sure that that is also attended to. And then there's the pressure to produce research, pressure to publish, pressure to, get good data, to produce, meaningful data. And so some of these things might not even be within control, but there is this huge pressure on graduate students for that. And then additionally, on top of the research work they're doing, they might have to take courses. And so again, that's like a big time commitment, big energy involved with that. And like I mentioned in the previous slides, finances is another big issue. They have to worry about, potentially figuring out how to fund their education. They have to figure out how to, ensure that they are able to eat, to live in a place, to rent. So financial security is a big part of the graduate student experience, and that is a big stressor as well. And then students who may come in with a mental health condition, or if they develop a mental health condition while they are in graduate school, that would be another stressor for them as they have to sort of, figure out when they're going to go to their appointments or when they can go see a doctor or when they can seek treatment. And so making time for those things can be really challenging. And I do also want to note that, not just mental health, but any sort of like health condition, especially an ongoing health condition, can be very stressful because you have to adjust for those, accommodations and accessibility issues. And even seeking out and advocating for those things can be an added barrier. And then thinking about career opportunities after the program. So, I've when I was in grad school, we've joked that, sometimes students go for graduate schooling when they don't know what to do next. And that may be the case, maybe not, but there is always the understanding that there is an uncertainty after graduate programs. What is it? What is it next? Do I go further into academia? Do I go into the industry? Do I just completely change because this experience was not for me? So that can be stressful as well. And then having the role of a teaching assistant, having to do that work of, being in the classrooms, working with undergraduate students, sort of being in almost like a leadership position, and then having to sort of have those deadlines to do grading or having office hours can be, it's just, again, a lot of these things are things that are taking time from a graduate student's plate. And then finally, working with your supervisor, the thesis supervisor. So, there's so many different styles of supervising, and advisors can come in many ways. And so students can run into challenges if that relationship is not working, or if it's not constructive, or if it's just a mismatch of, the advisory style. So that can take a big chunk of that worry or stress in a student's life. So for students, when they're going through all of these things, it can be really challenging when mental health resources are not sort of, providing what they need. So they are either not well disseminated to students, professors, or staff. They are primarily geared to undergraduates, so they might either be inappropriate or inaccessible for graduate students, and they might not even address the things that they want to have addressed. And they are also potentially not made for complex and intense psychological difficulties. So there's clear need for, more specialized care. So this is a bit of an overview of, overall what like the general graduate student experience might look like that impacts their mental health. But let's specifically talk about graduate student burnout. So burnout is defined as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, and that is according to the World Health Organization. Burnout is not really classified as a medical condition, and instead it is considered as a occupational phenomenon. And you will notice that this definition says workplace, but it is very much applicable in the post-secondary setting, especially for students. And if you notice the phrasing of work, workplace, or job throughout this presentation, please know that it can translate to the post-secondary environment as well. So burnout has three main features or dimensions, and those are exhaustion, detachment, and feelings of inadequacy. Uh, let's start with let's go over each of them. So let's start with exhaustion. Exhaustion is more than feeling, just tired. It's sort of a persistent physical, cognitive, and emotional depletion. And it's an ongoing feeling of, emptiness and mental exhaustion and feeling very fatigued. Detachment, sometimes referred as depersonalization or cynicism, uh, it's basically a loss of engagement with the work. So students may feel disengaged. They might not really have that motivation or optimism that they came in with at the start of the year. And they might even also emotionally distance from people, whether it's their advisors, their peers, or the people that they work with. And it can basically sort of make them withdraw from like the work that they're doing and the schooling experience itself. And then feelings of inadequacy refers to the decrease in feelings of confidence and accomplishment in one's work. A lot of students are very capable and very talented when they come into graduate school, and suddenly as they go through it and they're sort of, juggling all these things and doing all this work, they struggle feeling confident in themselves, and they might develop imposter syndrome, or they might compare themselves with their peers, and they feel like they're not good enough in their program, or whether this is the right fit for them, and that can really play a role in burnout. And these things can really show up in highly competitive and stressful environments, such as grad school. And so individually, we might see these things, but together it can really sort of contribute to our burnout. So burnout among graduate students specifically, there is a high correlation between stress and burnout, and specifically to exhaustion. So the more grad students are stressed, they are more exhausted, and that leads to more burnout. And then for graduate students, this research noting that they observe more exhaustion compared to detachment and inadequacy. Not to say that those things don't appear, but exhaustion is a key thing that shows up. And then there is also high emotional exhaustion among graduate students, which can lead to higher rates of program dropouts and lower satisfaction with their schooling experience. And then another study noted that the burnout experienced by graduate students are very similar to what general workers experience as well. So what can burnout, with exhaustion, detachment, and inadequacy look like at different stages? So the image here, it shows kind of like the different stages that students can sort of go through. And we'll start with engaged, the one in green at the far left. So when students are engaged, they feel satisfied with their work. They are optimistic, they're committed, they feel good about what they're doing. Even if there are challenges, they feel okay to sort of navigate them. And so they care enough about it to know that, okay, this is something I want to do, and this is something I am wanting to complete and accomplish. As early stress shows up, there's some inability to focus. Students may be having a hard time, doing the work, or they might avoid making decisions. They might procrastinate a little. They might say, I work better under pressure, and sort of, put off things that they need to get done, and they might start pushing their limits. And they might also start neglecting their personal needs. So they might skip lunch, they might stop working out, they might, get less sleep so that they can get their work done. And these are things that we all might be guilty of. And then when chronic stress sets in, students might socially withdraw. They might feel like they don't have time to actually connect, or they might not have the energy to connect with their friends, families, or with their peers. And they may also have a cynical attitude. So, they might not respect or trust the people or the work that they're doing. They may feel like, they're not really interested in the work, and they might even question, what the point of it is. And then they also might develop apathy. So, you know, they might lack goal directed activities, they might lack real emotion or feeling, and they might feel very impassive in their work and life. And then at the point of burnout, there is social isolation, so completely cutting themselves off from socializing, again, for many variety of reasons, whether it's energy, time, whatever, or they're just worried that, oh, I need to get all of these things done, but I just don't have time or energy to be meeting up with people, or they're just too exhausted to sort of make that effort. They might be pessimistic, so they might look at the worst possible outcome when it comes to certain things, like finishing up their work or how the research is going, and that can transfer into the personal life as well. And then some of these things can manifest mentally and physically. So they might start getting headaches, aches and pains, feel emotionally drained, and this can really, kind of bleed into these other things that they're doing. And I want to emphasize that, students can sort of go through different stages at different times. They can reach a point of burnout, but then sort of manage it and get to like an earlier, like a better state. And that can really change at any point, depending on all kinds of reasons, whether it's individual, systemic, or whether they decide to that, address these things. So we'll talk quite a bit about, what we can do individually, but an important thing to understand is that burnout is a systems issue. It can largely be impacted by different systems, and these systems that individuals cannot control. So we're, constantly reacting to changes in the demands and pressures that are resulted from these systems. So students, we'll just go through each of this level. So level one, external level. If graduate students, they might feel a lot of stress related to outcomes that are related to funding and budget costs, and expectations of what mental health services are like or what they are actually like. Um, Things like return to campus and hybrid models, especially earlier when the pandemic was ongoing, or when it was starting to sort of ease up. Those big changes and transitions can have a great impact on students. And then, things like decline in funding when it comes to mental health services, things like that can also impact students' experience. And then in level two, students may experience an increase in stress related to lack of understanding about student well-being and, the lack of prioritization if there is in the institutional level. And, if students are not feeling heard or their issues aren't taken seriously, that can, really sort of decrease morale or the trust in the system. And then if leadership and management is, very task and productivity focused and less so about, how students are doing or their journey or what supports they need, that can again stress a lot of students out. And then things like organizational culture, like, focusing on individual responsibility and professional siloing and discouraging team-based care and social support is another way for, stresses to occur for students. And then finally, individuals can experience stress related to things like lack of communication and support, and that can occur between advisor and student. If there's a lack of role clarity between, students and the supervisor, so if the student does not understand, what they're expected of, or if the supervisor just does not explain that clearly, that can just create a lot of misunderstanding. And then things like workload and time pressures, especially relating to, research outcomes that might not be in the student's control, that can be a very stressful situation as well. And then unfair treatment, especially within that advisory relationship, that is, it's challenging because it's ongoing relationship that students feel like they have to be in and they have to navigate sometimes by themselves. And so all of these things, they are a systems issue. But research does suggest that, risk factors that are more individual based can also sort of predict burnout. So it can like work together, the systems contributors and like the individual contributors. This is an oversimplified graphic, I admit, and it doesn't really address the nuances on different campuses and different places. But this is just sort of like an introductory understanding on what sort of the impact is like. So, what are the risk factors? Certain things can predict burnout. They are correlational. They're not causation. They're not causations. Um, but this is things that have been noted within research. So work factors, things like low sense of autonomy, feeling that nobody can do the work but you, so you think you have to do everything. Um, if work is the only meaningful activity and work substitutes social life, things like that can really increase the risk of burnout. And then personal factors that can increase burnout for students is things like gender. So it's been noted that women specifically are more likely than men to experience exhaustion, cognitive and emotional impairment. Marital status, so being single, divorced, or widowed carries a possible risk of burnout. Things like lack of physical activity, lack of sleep, lack of social connection, things like that can also just increase that risk. And feelings of like things like imposter syndrome can, make people feel isolated or feel lonely, and they might also, that might result from that feelings of exhaustion and inadequacy. And then in terms of protective factors, there are certain things that might sort of buffer the cost of the work that students are doing. So things like having a positive workplace culture. This is like one of those things, workplace, school, lab culture. And things like having perceived collegial support, effective leadership. So cultivating, it's basically cultivating an environment that enables, conversation, or enables positivity, or, constructive feedback. Things like that can be very helpful. And then work autonomy and flexibility is also very important, especially for graduate students to feel like they are being trusted and their knowledge is trusted. And then personal protective factors include optimism and humor, resilience, having effective stress reduction habits, and embedding them when students recognize that they're stressed, having high emotional intelligence and growth mindset, which both can be cultivated, having social support, and school satisfaction. And when it comes to school satisfaction, I think this is kind of where, those individual contributors and systems contributors can really tie in together. Um, there is a unique relationship between school demands, school resources, and school satisfaction. So when school demands are high, it is more likely for students to feel burnout, and it is also likely for school satisfaction to decrease. And school demands are basically anything that sort of require effort or skill, and it is associated with a mental or physical cost. School resources, on the other hand, they enhance student life and they help achieve their work and personal goals. So it basically reduces school demands and it stimulates personal and professional growth. So school resources can look like autonomy, social support, constructive feedback, and these things buffer the cost of school demands. And so when school resources increase, school satisfaction also increases. So here on the slide, when school resources decrease and school demands increase, that is where the burnout risk can increase. And this is where, individually students have to take action to sort of seek out those school resources to, increase the ways that they can buffer the cost and manage those school demands. But then the school itself, especially, faculty and staff, they can also play a role in increasing school resources for students. So now that we sort of went over what burnout is and how it works and what it looks like, let's talk about burnout recovery. And the main way that we're going to address burnout recovery in this presentation is to sort of address the 3 dimensions. And so what we're going to do is we're going to address exhaustion by recuperation, address detachment by refocusing, and address feelings of inadequacy by realignment. And we'll go through each of these separately. So let's start with recuperation. And I feel like, maybe like I've talked about sleep a lot with people and I talk about my own sleep, and sleep is a great big conversation that we always have. And but it's I guess it's not really, we don't have it enough potentially, because sleep does really make a huge impact on burnout. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. But sleep has a role. The restoration theory of sleep suggests that we sleep to restore our resources. And different stages of sleep act differently. Deep sleep, which is stages 3 and 4, are thought to, strengthen immunity, enhance thinking, act on, learning and memory. And then REM sleep, which is sort of like the initial stage, that stage is thought to sort of influence, again, learning and memory as well, especially our emotions and emotional memories. An average adult needs between 7 to 9 hours per 24-hour period. I don't think most people are getting that, and graduate students especially are not getting that. So when there is poor sleep, which is less than 6 hours, it acts as a predictor and a moderator for burnout. One of the studies I referred earlier, when they looked at that high exhaustion in graduate students, they noted that, good quality sleep and good quantity of sleep acted as a moderator for exhaustion and therefore impacted the risk of burnout. And then when you also have poor sleep, that also acts as it kind of like worsens burnout, and then burnout worsens your quality of sleep after. So it almost acts as a cycle. And then when you have good sleep, that improves your burnout symptoms. It helps you, return to work and sort of get back on the saddle, if I guess that could be a thing. Um, but sleep is really not the only way to sort of address that recuperation. It is also addressing your domains of wellness. So graduate students, again, they have a lot on their plate, so they feel like they don't have time for these things. But I believe that, anything is better than nothing. So if they are able to embed some of these things little by little throughout their routines, I think that can make a great difference. So things like getting regular movement, getting out in nature, having supportive relationships, balanced nutrition, those things can really impact outcome of burnout. So the next pillar is detachment, which will be addressed by refocus. So what we're going to talk about is approach avoidance motivation theory. Basically, when we seek rewards in life and we pursue achievement-based goals, it generally is associated with feelings of well-being. And so when we're sort of seeking out these rewards, when we're sort of motivated to seek these things out, we're using our approach system. So we, move forward with optimism. We're goal oriented, and we are largely motivated by the presence or absence of positive outcomes. And a lot of the times, this approach motivation is intrinsic. So you're kind of almost doing it for yourself. And on the flip side, if somebody is using the withdrawal system, it is more likely, they're more likely to be motivated by the presence or absence of negative outcomes or more extrinsic motivations. So for graduate students, they might initially start out with that approach system. They're, starting graduate school for reasons that are intrinsically motivated and that they want like positive outcomes. And then when they are so exhausted, or when they don't know what they're doing, or when they feel like when they feel like they don't know what they're doing, they might sort of shift towards that withdrawal system. So I have this image of a brain, and the reason I have that is some research has suggested that, these motivations activate different sides of the brain. So, approach system is more associated with activity in the left frontal lobes, and then the withdrawal system is associated with the right frontal lobes. However, that is, that's a little bit of a simplified understanding, and potentially, there's so much mixed information because our brains are far more complex. There is also research that suggests that approach motivation is driven by our reward pathways, and avoidance motivation is driven by fear or stress. Regardless of that, I think there is a place in our sort of behaviors to sort of understand how we approach things, and graduate students can sort of keep that in mind as well. So what does that look like? How do we go from avoidance focus to approach focus? How can students reframe that mindset? So for a student who is avoidance focused, they might kind of think of this situation. I will share X, Y, and Z in our lab meeting this week to make it look like I am not slacking off. So they're far more focused on, what potentially others might think. They're trying to avoid that negative feeling. So that's what is motivating them to do this. And to shift that into a more approach-focused motivation approach, it might look like I will share X, Y, and Z in our lab meeting this week to show everyone the work that I have accomplished or made progress on. So it is more intrinsic. Another example is for avoidance focused is I will make a list of short and long-term goals to avoid disappointing my professor. Again, the focus is on how the professor might react and less so about what those goals mean to them. And then if that were to be shifted to approach focused, it would sound more like I will make a list of short and long-term goals to stay on track of my thesis. So the final pillar for recovery for burnout that sort of addresses the feelings of inadequacy is to sort of understand the personal belief systems that students may have, or their what they might be connected to, or what their values or principles of beliefs are. So these things can mean a lot of different things to people. Some people might sort of, gather meaning from things like organized religion. Some may gather meaning through pursuit of knowledge or through science. Some people may gather meaning through the natural world. And regardless of how that is done, having this connection can really, help people and graduate students specifically to get a sense of purpose and connection and feel belonging. And that can really hold them in place in what they need to do, especially when they feel inadequate. Um, I know that, spiritual, or the term spiritual can mean a lot of different things to different people, and that can be a tricky subject. So I do want to acknowledge that these things can look very different for different people. So people who have a strong connection to their meaning, or who have like sort of an anchor to what they're doing, they have an increased capacity to care for themselves as well as for others. And so, having this like anchor, that it increases self-care, it increases resilience and strength. They find meaning from challenges, so they have some a growth mindset, and they can also cultivate inner peace. In a study that was done on oncology nurses who practice self-transcendence, which is working to discover meaning in life and death, they noted that they were less likely to experience burnout. So having that robust spiritual life can really, lessen the amount of stress, burnout, empathic strain, and potentially turning to substance use and addiction. So how can graduate students sort of strengthen that connection? One of the main ways would be to sort of slow things down, make space for silence and reflection, express gratitude, participate in ceremony of any kind, whatever that makes sense, practicing mindfulness and cultivating community. And different things can work for different people, so there's not really one way to do this. And then another thing that we sort of encourage folks is to use a strength-based approach. So like I said, graduate students come in with a lot of skills and talents, and they're very smart and capable people. And sometimes that is forgotten when they are going through graduate school, when they're juggling through multiple things. So it's so easy for them to be critical of themselves and focus on their negatives and their issues and their problems, but helping them refocus on their strengths can really help them sort of build that confidence. So if you want to have something handy in, like a sheet that you want to print out, or if you want to send some of this information to your colleagues or to the students that you're working with, we do have sort of like a handy info sheet on our website. This QR code will take right to it, or you can go on our website, and if you look it up on our search bar, you can access it. And this is a really great resource to have it on hand if you are working with students. And then just some final notes before we end it. But I think there is, responsibility by the institution, responsibility within an individual level, but then there's also responsibility with each other. So creating a community of care. And one of the ways that we suggest that can be done is to sort of understand how we can look out for each other and equip ourselves with the knowledge of, addressing mental health signs of somebody not doing well. And that is sort of what the More Feet on the Ground project that we did helps people do. So, how do we recognize some of these signs? Like if, a graduate student notices their peers going through something, or if a supervisor notices their graduate students going through something, what are the performance indicators? What are the behavior indicators? What are the physical indicators? So sort of knowing how to identify those is really important. And then when you notice these things, how do you, respond to it? How do you set the stage and make sure that, you're talking to them in an appropriate place and an appropriate time? It's important to ask permission and see if they're willing to talk about it. How do you actively listen? How do you set the boundaries, especially if you're not, clinical staff and if you don't have a mental health professional background? And how do you ensure there is safety for you and for the person that you're helping? And then knowing how to refer people to, your campus or community resources, understanding what campus resources are out there that make sense for this person. And then finally, we encourage reflection. So, thinking about how that experience went, is that impacting your own mental health? What could have done differently? Do you need to debrief? And so on. So some final recommendations. I know we sort of went through a set of things that, students or staff can sort of guide students with when it comes to burnout. But these recommendations have been pulled out from the graduate student mental health toolkit that's on our website, and that specifically addresses things that can be done to sort of enhance support for graduate students. So things like providing flexible and specific mental health supports that make sense for graduate students, that make sense for their schedules and their commitments, providing virtual options for flexibility, having options of formal and informal supports that can sort of, meet the needs of different students. And then having programs that address different phases of graduate school because, graduate school is not static. It looks different at different points in time. So having that understanding can be really nice for students. Considering the need for privacy for graduate students when they're accessing support. So I talked about how, graduate students maybe they have different hats at different points. They're students with their advices and when they're doing their research, when they're taking their courses, but then they're sort of like in a leadership role when they are teaching assistants. So, if they have to share or access supports that, maybe one of the students in their classes are going to, that might feel uncomfortable or they might, that might hinder the students, ability to access these supports for privacy reasons. So sort of having that understanding and, providing options is really the best way to go about it. Um, and then finally, proactively addressing the common issues faced by graduate students. So things like, imposter syndrome, stress, student advisor relationships, things like that, and embedding those within different levels of the school. So, you can embed it within the institutional policy and strategic goals, but it can also look like, faculty to sort of have like open conversation about it and, cultivating that environment for students to be able to talk about it. So if you would like to know more about some of the things that we recommend and some of the, things that we've found about graduate student mental health, you can find our toolkit on our website as well. This is a QR code. It should directly take you there. And I think this work was done a while back, I think before I was in the organization. So but it's still very, very relevant. So just to close off, I always like to ask folks to reflect on, what will you start doing, stop doing, or continue doing based on this presentation. And, if you would like, you're welcome to share it in the chat. But yeah, I think this is I know that these are a lot of these things are very much applicable to staff and faculty as well. But it is also very applicable to graduate students. So thank you so much for being here. I think I have enough time for questions, but if you would like to get in touch, my email is up there. The website again is down below if you would like to check out the things that I mentioned. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much again for the wonderful presentation. And yeah, we do have a couple minutes for questions, like you said. So anyone in the audience, please feel free to drop questions in the chat or Q&A function if you have them. And we will take some time to get to those. And just as a friendly reminder, there is information on those CE credits in the chat.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see folks. Oh, well, I can't really see folks, but I can see you at least, Madison.
Sure, no problem. Well, while we wait and see if there's any questions that will come through, I have a question. I was kind of curious if there are any unexpected like positions or roles on campuses that you are familiar with or aware of that you've done work with that were kind of unexpected in supporting graduate students and their mental health.
Yeah, I guess not within my role, but when I was in graduate school, we actually, I was doing my graduate work during COVID, and one of the things that was set up was it was an online virtual chat called Grad Chats, and people, students were encouraged to come in and chat about what's happening, and it happened every week, and um, it was it was interesting because you didn't realize how much students wanted to talk about what they were going through, and they didn't have an avenue or they didn't have somebody to talk to. So um, I think, yeah, I think like engaging students in different ways is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. And it sounds like creating that space, if it doesn't already exist, and letting folks know that it's there and open for them.
For sure. And I think there's a big, you know, I think we underestimate like peer-based supports. I think sometimes a lot of students feel like, oh, if I talk about my experiences, I don't think they're going to understand or I don't think they're going to relate, but they're more inclined to talk to somebody who is going through similar things. So it's peer-based supports have a big role in supporting student mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also just wanted to note that QPR, the training that we provide, can really help with recognizing, responding, referring, and reflecting those points that you mentioned. So for the audience, if those are some things that you could use some more skills in or you're not quite comfortable with yet, QPR can be really helpful with that. So I encourage you to sign up again.
It's fantastic that you guys offer that. That's great. I just
Awesome.
noticed somebody in the chat saying that note on connecting with nature as a recovery strategy for burnout really resonated with me. I'm going to take my graduate advisors on a walk around campus to look for snowdrops. Oh, that's fantastic. I feel like I would have loved that when I was in school. I think it makes such a difference to be able to like reconnect with nature and, sort of step away from the screens and the work. Yeah. Um, Building off of the previous question, who facilitated the grad chat you mentioned about when you were in graduate school? Yeah, so it was facilitated by students who were part of the health promotion team. So they were volunteers who were graduate students themselves, and then they partnered with a counselor to provide that, I guess, service.
Alrighty, we'll give just another minute here if there's any final questions that folks want to submit. But thank you again so much for sharing about this important topic and really appreciate kind of the individual and systems level approach and recognizing that everyone in the audience and on campus can have a role in supporting student mental health and graduate student mental health.
Yeah.
It looks like no more questions coming in for today. We'll go ahead and give folks a few minutes back. But thank you again. Don't forget to use the code for CEs by tomorrow at noon. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar. Thank you so much.